So this morning, the talk title is There Really Is No Place Like Home, which is kind of apropos, I think, for all of us weary travelers, right? So we've spent the past several weeks exploring the Science of Mind New Thought teachings found in the classic movie, The Wizard of Oz. And so today we're going to conclude our trip over the rainbow and bring it all home as we look at the concept of there really is no place like home. But before I do, we have a few Wizard of Oz trivia questions, and Allison's going to pass out candy if anyone gets this right, okay? So come on up. Okay, these are kind of tough if you haven't watched The Wizard of Oz in a while, but, you know, we'll pass the candy around anyway. What was the name of the horse that drew the carriage that Dorothy and the gang rode when they first arrived in Oz? Sylvester. Okay, this is easier. Where else did that horse appear? Where else did the horse appear? Do you remember? He was in Kansas. He belonged to Professor Marvel. They get easier. What song was cut from the movie and then resurrected from the cutting room floor? Give them some candy. All right, Over the Rainbow. And why? Yes. Why was it originally cut? Do you know why it was originally cut? Because it slowed the movie down. They thought it slowed the movie down too much. And isn't that the most iconic part of the movie? I think so. Okay, so who was originally cast as the Tin Man? Anybody remember? Betty Epson. Betty Epson was originally cast as the Tin Man, but why was he replaced? Any
He was busy with Beverly Hills.
I was going to say.
Yeah. Actually, he got lead poisoning from the costume.
No,
Yeah.
Did the other person?
Huh?
Did the other?
I don't know what they did. Maybe they probably had him wear something, underneath, which probably made it a lot hotter. The other, wasn't there something about the Wicked Witch, like catching on fire, getting burned? I thought that there was something I had read about her too, but that's actually not one of the questions. How many scenes were the Wizard and the Good Witch of the North in together? This is kind of a trick question. Think about it. Zero. Bart got it right. 0, because actually he floats away and then she comes in. So they were really never in the same scene. Okay, Allison knows the answer to this. What was the original color of the ruby slippers?
Green.
White.
No.
Gold.
No.
Silver.
Silver! Allison gets a piece of candy! And why were they changed to red? Why did they change them to red? It's because red showed up better in Technicolor than silver did. They wanted to make an impression. So this is actually kind of interesting here. How did author Frank Baum come up with the name of Oz for the land of Oz? Any ideas? I mean, this is, kind of interesting trivia. Telling stories to his children about a faraway land, one day a child asked the name of the land. He looked around the room where he was sitting, and across it was a filing cabinet, and the drawers were labeled A through M and O through Z. And the land of Oz was born. Something as simple as that. Isn't that amazing? Okay, Allison, thank you. And help yourself, because this cannot go back home with me. Okay, so now you know more about the Wizard of Oz than you ever thought you would, right? And that brings us to today as we look at the idea that there really is no place like home. T.S. Eliot once wrote these wonderful lines: "We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and to know the place for the first time." So what does that really mean? Well, the story of Dorothy shows us clearly what that means. From the beginning of the story, even before Dorothy goes on her adventure over the rainbow, she's really looking to go home, isn't she? Now, obviously, I don't mean physically home, because she's already there, but something just isn't right. She doesn't really know the place, to use T.S. Eliot's words. She isn't happy. She isn't fulfilled. She's not satisfied or loved. She's ignored by Auntie Em and Uncle Henry, and by really everybody else on the farm. They're all too busy for her, right? And she's gotten herself into trouble with the law. But actually, it's Toto is the one who's in trouble with the law. But Dorothy sets it up as a ploy for attention. So she isn't home, even though she's home. From a metaphysical interpretation, she just doesn't know who she is. She has to find herself, right? She doesn't know who she is. She's not connected to her inner home, to her inner spark, to the divine potential for her goodness and greatness that is within her. She isn't awake or aware of who she is. She's lost God. She's lost that connection. And so she goes looking for home outside of herself. When she's still in Kansas, she looks for it by running after everyone on the farm, trying to get their attention. And then she runs away and looks for it in Professor Marvel, the carny that she meets up with. And this is really interesting. Remember, after she has the crystal ball experience with Professor Marvel, she decides to go back to her physical home because, she's in a lot of fear. Why? Because it shows that Annie M is sick, right? She's in fear about Annie M, and she's getting very fearful about the big storm that's brewing. And what does she find when she gets home? She finds that she's even farther away from really going home than before, as the closed doors to the storm cellar symbolize. Her fears have moved her even farther away from knowing who she really is, from really going home. And she's left out in the storm, seemingly all alone. So her exploration continues, this time as a journey to Oz. And Dorothy once again looks outside of herself to try to get home. This is a really pointed lesson of how we might get through one experience only to have it show up again, this time in Technicolor, right? So that perhaps this time we'll get the message that our soul is trying to give us. Have you ever experienced that kind of a deja vu feeling like, gee, didn't I go through this once before? Haven't I experienced this? Didn't I learn this lesson? How come I haven't gotten this yet? Okay, I'm going to get it this time so I don't have to do this again, right? I know I have. We are always in the process of awakening, and every event in our life has the potential to serve as a catalyst for that awakening. Whether we allow it or not is up to us. But if we don't, then we get to have more similar experiences and perhaps have them in Technicolor. In Oz, Dorothy still doesn't wake up, and she looks to a pretty shady character, the wizard, to take her home. She continues to look to him even after Toto reveals him to be a fraud. She thinks that he will get her home. Have you ever looked to somebody else thinking that they could solve your problems? And, somehow they're older, smarter, more educated, whatever. They know better, and we want to trust them. We want to put our lives in their hands because we think that they'll know better for us than we truly do. The wizard promises to take her back to Kansas in his balloon, but it's only after the balloon that takes off without Dorothy that the wizard reveals to her that he really doesn't know how to work it anyway. So wow, that's kind of scary. So how often really have we trusted someone else to make a decision because we didn't trust ourselves to know the answer? Many of us grew up not trusting our own abilities because we were taught from a very young age that we weren't enough, that we didn't know, that whatever idea it was we had or thought it wasn't valued, it wasn't valuable. So it's something we are now facing perhaps at another time because we know that just isn't true, is it? When we listen to our spirit, when we listen to our intuition within, we know that we're hearing the voice of God. We know that we're being guided and directed. So in Kansas, Dorothy is looking outside of herself for home. In Oz, she's looking outside of herself for home. But when Glenda tells her, you've always had the power to go back to Kansas, in that moment, Dorothy begins to awaken. And she begins to trust her own power, her own inner spark, her own innate goodness, and her own potential for greatness. In that moment, she begins to find herself within herself. She begins to know herself for the first time. But she does not go home yet, does she? She has something really important to do before she returns home. She has to stop and say goodbye to each one of her companions. Remember that part in the movie? And perhaps it's much, much more important than merely saying goodbye. Perhaps in those sweet, intimate moments of connection with the scarecrow, the lion, and the one she'll miss the most, as she whispered, the Tin Man, she wasn't really saying goodbye. Perhaps she was integrating their qualities within her. She told each one of them she could not have done this without them, and that's perfectly true. To be awake to our true selves, to go home, there is an integration of divine intelligence, divine love, and divine strength of power. To put a spiritual spin on it, which I think I'm doing with the whole story here, but in those moments, Dorothy finds God, who, by the way, has been there all along, right? Symbolically hanging around in that pink bubble that Glenda uses to go everywhere. She feels God. She sees God. The God that is closer than her hands and feet, nearer than her breath, and the God that is everywhere. Glenda explains that she did not share this truth with Dorothy earlier because Dorothy wouldn't have believed her. She had to learn it for herself. Have you ever told someone that they are divinely perfect and had them scoff and not believe you? Yeah, I've been there too. I've told people, oh, just if you knew who you are, and they're just not there. They can't see that yet. Remember the ruby slippers from the lesson when we talked about that. We are let, not left, alone to discover who we are, and each one of us must do it for our own selves. Someone telling us isn't going to do it. We have to discover that on our own. And just to expand for a moment on that idea, self-awareness cannot really be taught. Hence, we can't teach it. It has to be gained from experience. As the Zen poet Jeremy Wolfe so eloquently wrote, experience isn't the best teacher, it's the only teacher. Dr. Ernest Holmes, on The Science of Mind, page 273, takes it a step further by saying it's not just experience, but bitter experience that is often our teacher when he wrote, we give intelligence outlet either by pure inspiration and intuition or by the way of bitter experience. And with most of us, it is through the latter. But I'd like to think that maybe we've come a little bit beyond that because I love Suzanne's affirmation of I learn my lessons with ease and grace, or grace and ease, just, it doesn't have to be painful. I think there's been a belief that it had to be painful in the past, but it doesn't need to be anymore. So, good morning, come on in. That's okay. Come on in. We're talking about kind of the last in our series of The Wizard of Oz, and the title of the talk today is There Really Is No Place Like Home. So we're talking about where Dorothy has come to realize that home is within where God is. And Dorothy certainly really did go through some bitter experiences, didn't she, to get where she needed to be. But the awakening came. The integration came through her experiences, and then one thing remained to take her home. She needed to trust. To trust that she had the ability to go home, she needed to activate that trust by clicking her heels, right? Powerful metaphysical statement for us, and we need to trust that we are divine, and we need to trust that divine law is always at work, and it's always activated by our word. Ernest Holmes wrote, we should be careful not to divide our mental house against itself. Having announced the law of liberty, we must not deny. How many of us say our affirmations and then in the next breath say, oh, well, I didn't really think that would work. Or, well, I set this law in motion and it hasn't happened yet. I claimed my abundance and I'm not seeing any more money in my checking account. We don't give it a chance to work. We deny it. And the law we see, what does the law always say? The law always says yes. So when we say our affirmations, we need to stand behind them and let the law work and not negate that, because if you negate it, then it's a house divided against itself, and the law is going yes, 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 and it doesn't know what to do. So we give out confusion, we get confusion back. So we need to be clear. And that's true. How many times have we declared our word only to fret and worry that the law wasn't going to act upon it? We're undoing the very thing we say we want by doubting the law. Going home and knowing the place for the first time takes trust. It takes an integration of love, intelligence, and power. And it takes an awareness of our inner spark, our innate goodness and greatness. Going home is about walking that spiritual path of self-discovery, following the yellow brick road to discover the inner spark. Ernest Holmes on page 191 of the Science of Mind says, "We will deliver ourselves from sickness and trouble in exact proportion to our discovery of ourselves and our true relationship with the whole." So right now, I invite you to close your eyes and think of a challenge in your life and what it means to you to go home around that challenge. How can you integrate the divine intelligence, the scarecrow, divine love, the Tin Man, and the infinite strength of power, the lion, as well as the power for goodness and greatness, the ruby slippers? Now visualize Glinda, the good witch of the north, floating in on her pink bubble, reminding you that you have always had the power within to go home. For there really is no place like home, where we do know without a doubt that we are the divine in expression and we are the beloved in whom Spirit is well pleased. And we are supported in all things by the universal law, which is continuously working to bring us our good. Join me now as we know the truth that there really is no place like home. And so it is.